What did journalist Johnny Harris get wrong in his video, Why the U.S. Military Spends So Much Money? A number of you reached out to me about this video on LinkedIn and email and Twitter, and I finally took a look at the video in question. Yeah, there's a few mistakes, at least 25 instances of misinformation or items that need more context. Now, my first draft for this script for the video was about 90 minutes long. That's about 3 times as long as Johnny's original video. So instead, I'm just going to focus on the top 9 lies in the video. Any documents related to this, as well as sources, can be found at ryanmcbeth.substack.com for free. And that's also where you can watch this video ad-free if you're a paid member. Now, a lot of people are probably going to share this video, so allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ryan McBeth. I served as an infantryman for 20 years, deploying to both Egypt and Iraq. While serving, I got degrees in computer science and engineering management, as well as an MSc in cybersecurity later. I went to work for Accenture Federal Services, where I wrote software that found people so my client could, well, you get the idea. Now I work for the Texas Aero Med Lab, a drone startup based out of Dallas, Texas, that uses AI-powered drones to deliver whole blood to wounded soldiers on the battlefield. Now, despite what Johnny Harris would like you to believe, just calling yourself a defense contractor does not mean the government showers you with Scrooge McDuck levels of money. So Aeromed Lab is looking for accredited investors in the range of $50K to $1.6 million for a $1.6 million fundraising round. So if you're an accredited investor who wants to help us save lives on the battlefield, call me. Now, that's kind of my first point. If Johnny Harris were telling the truth about the military, that the military spends too much on stuff it doesn't need, my Aeromed Lab would probably be funded for this round because the military really needs this thing. Anybody who complains about the military-industrial complex being a fire hose of money for defense contractors never spent a week filling out a 40-page grant form for a chance to be awarded $75,000. And it's kind of surprising that Johnny Harris got so much wrong. After all, he spoke with a diverse range of people for this story, such as an economics and climate change expert, a think tank policy wonk, and a peace activist. But Johnny Harris did not note that he spoke to anyone who actually served in the military or worked for a defense contractor. So you can see how this might tilt the narrative a little bit if you didn't talk with anybody from the side that actually does the defense work. You know, a few months back, I went on the Danny Jones podcast and I dropped a bombshell that the military-industrial complex does not exist.
The military-industrial complex. There's no such thing. No.
And to prove it, I made a YouTube video about this topic where I proved it mathematically. And one of my main points was that all the top 5 scary defense companies make less money than Procter & Gamble, a company that sells diapers. It's true. It is publicly available information. The spreadsheets and earnings records are available for free at ryanmcbeth.substack.com, or just go to the defense company's websites and download their annual reports. So I'm going to get into the top 9 lies that Johnny Harris told in his video, which are the lie about the F-35, the lie about defense spending economics, the lie about the Stinger missile, the lie about consolidation, the lie about lobbying, the lie about stock prices, the lie about distributed manufacturing, the lie about the Pentagon's revolving door, and finally, the lie about military spending. But first, if you're sick of all the lying on the internet, there is one good source for truth, and that's Ground News.
So this is kind of interesting. Have you ever heard of Polymarket?
It's a betting site where you can even bet on the 2024 election results.
And I was actually interviewed by Polymarket
About the odds of Israel striking Iran, although I wish they would have used a better picture.
Now, I read Ground News every day as part of my morning routine. I actually pay for it. They did not give it to me for free, and I was a member before they sponsored me. But look what popped up on Ground News today.
FBI raids home of Polymarket CEO. And this story was not in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times.
And this is why Ground News is so important, because it allows you to see stories that you may have missed.
Ground News gives you the factuality rating of articles and also gives you the bias distribution, left, center, and right. It also gives you the ownership of each media company.
So you'll know who's behind who is telling you what to think. So click the link in the description below or go to ground.news/Ryan to get 50% off the Vantage plan,
which is the same plan that I use.
So go to ground.news/Ryan and start getting the whole news.
Now, I have to start by saying that I tried to reach out to Johnny, but his email is hidden behind corporate agents and his DMs are locked on Twitter, and he never responded to my LinkedIn request. And you know what? I get it. I have almost 1 million followers on YouTube, and I get about 100 or so emails a day. If there's a one-to-one correlation, he would probably get about 600 emails a day. And yes, I know I'm Ryan McBeth, and I could find his email, phone number, and address easy enough because well, you get the idea. So I tried reaching out, but I guess not everybody makes themselves as accessible to their fans as I do. So to start, let's talk about the lie about the F-35. Near the beginning of the video, Johnny Harris does this.
We even made a little model of this guy. And like the real thing, the model is continually breaking down.
Now, it's kind of fashionable to criticize the F-35, and the initial F-35 had some problems with high cost, delays, and technical issues. But if you're still criticizing the plane today, it's kind of like the journalistic equivalent of creating a sitcom about a fat, stupid, blue-collar guy and his beautiful, skinny, put-upon wife. It's just lazy writing. The fact is that the F-35 is the most lethal, survivable, and connected fighter on the planet. So, 19 allies and partners just happened to choose a plane that didn't work? Poland recently had their first F-35 delivered. And Poland is not messing around. They're on their way to creating the largest military in Europe. Did this military-industrial complex somehow trick Poland into buying a fighter that didn't work? And if you're complaining about cost, you also have to talk about capability. The F-35 is essentially a flying, stealthy supercomputer that can tie in multiple sensors and platforms. Israel calls it a deer, or the mighty one. And they've been riding it hard and putting it away wet for almost a year now during their war in Gaza and Lebanon. And the F-35 may have been used in Israel's October 26th strike on Iran, a strike that resulted in 0 losses on Israel's side. Is that worth the cost? Israel seems to think so. So next is the lie about defense spending economics. And this happens at multiple points in the video. And here's the problem. Johnny Harris compares American defense spending on individual projects with the economies of various countries.
I know that these numbers are abstract and billion doesn't mean anything to anyone, but like $140 billion, that's the entire economy of Morocco that the Pentagon spends on R&D.
Like $140 billion for research, which is more than the economy of Morocco. And while it's tempting to do these things like that in order to show scale, it's actually a logical fallacy called false equivalence. And I'll give you an example here. This is my grocery bill for the month of October. It's about $100 higher than normal because I wanted the full-size candy bars this year for Halloween to give out. So I splurged at Sam's Club for full-size bars. But I normally spend about $400 a month on groceries for just me, which is somewhat between a moderate and a liberal food plan from the USDA. Now let's say we have a family of 4, 2 adults in the home, 1 male, 1 female, 2 kids, a child of 11, and a male teenager of 14. Their grocery bill would come to $1,417.60, and their grocery bill is so high because they're not a single male living alone who makes bachelor chow for dinner pretty much every night. It's almost like if you have more people and a bigger country, you need a larger military to protect it. So calling research and development of the U.S. military equivalent to the entire economy of Morocco might help with scale, but you're forgetting one crucial thing. The U.S. isn't Morocco, bub. We're not the same size as Morocco. We don't have the same population as Morocco. We don't have the same geopolitical threats as Morocco. So this isn't a lie as much as it is the silver tongue of a snake oil salesman. Yes, to fund the military. Good for everything that ails you. Guaranteed to regrow health care, kill that pesky national debt, and put that pep back in your educational system. Next is the lie about the Stinger missile. Here, Johnny Harris says,
the prices can get pretty out of control. Like the Pentagon used to pay $25,000 for this Stinger missile, and now they pay nearly $500,000 for the same missile. The price went up more than 16 times in just a couple decades. It's a little more than inflation.
And this is the first whopper of a lie. The problem is that on its face it seems truthful. And in fact, even Johnny Harris says inflation can't count for that.
It's a little more than inflation.
And here's the problem. One of the people who reached out to me said, the problem with Johnny Harris is that he sounds like he knows what he's talking about until he talks about something you know about. And this is something I know a little bit about, and it needs more context. A lot more. Back during the global war on terror, America thought that the U.S. Air Force pretty much dominated the skies, so there was no reason to invest in SHORAD, or short-range air defense. We even retired the M7 Bradley Linebacker, which was the air defense variant of the Bradley fighting vehicle. And if you don't need something, why build more of it? So the Army actually stopped ordering new Stinger missiles in the early 2000s. They were just ordering parts and components and refurbishing old missiles. The idea was to continue using the old missiles until they reached the end of their useful life and something new could be developed, which would happen in maybe 2030. The production line continued with spare parts and low-rate production for foreign sales, but that was totally shut down in December of 2020. I mean, after all, with the Air Force dominating the skies, there was no chance in hell that our adversary could ever use helicopters to... Oh. I guess we needed those Stingers after all. The U.S. sent about 1,400 Stingers to Ukraine, the Netherlands, Latvia, Italy, Lithuania, and Germany, or they sent about 600 more. And the U.S. went back to the manufacturer, RTX, formerly known as Raytheon, to order more, and we found out that sometimes shutting down a production line to save money can be really freaking expensive. RTX called in retirees who still knew how to build the missile. They were literally blowing cobwebs off test equipment, and they had to redesign some of the circuit boards because the manufacturers no longer made them. And a lot of this stuff had to be done by hand. Remember, this was a missile that was designed to replace the Red-Eye. The Stinger was developed in the 1970s and fielded in the 1980s. If you wanted to develop a brand new Apple IIe, which is roughly as old as the original fielded Stinger, would you be able to do it with the original parts and manufacturers? How much would it cost to get the original Apple IIe production line going again without a complete redesign? So yeah, it's not surprising that a new Stinger missile costs so much money because we don't have time for a redesign and we're using manufacturing methods that were used back when we could smoke on airplanes. And to top it all off, he says it's the same missile.
And now they pay nearly $500,000 for the same missile.
It's not the same missile. The guts are different and the guts are more expensive. So Johnny Harris's example of the increased cost of the Stinger was dishonest. And I have the feeling that he felt like it was such a good example that manufactured his point that he just couldn't pass it up. And he just hoped that no one would look into it. Well, hi, I'm the guy that looks into it. The next lie is about consolidation. Here, Johnny Harris mentions that most of the spending goes to the top 5 defense contractors.
There used to be a lot of different defense contractors, but over the last 3 decades, they got gobbled up by these big 5. Transitioning, from the words of the Pentagon, from 51 to 5 aerospace and defense prime contractors. As a result, the DoD is increasingly reliant on a small number of contractors for critical defense capabilities, i.e., we've got kind of a monopoly issue on our hands.
And again, this needs more context. Johnny kind of implies this happened out of greed or some sinister plot, this consolidation of manufacturers. In reality, this consolidation started in 1993, when the military started to downsize after the first Gulf War, and the Pentagon said to defense contractors that they would not be able to support them anymore, at least support so many of them anymore. I described what happened in my video exposing the military-industrial complex. Here's a clip from that video. On July 21st, 1993, a dinner was organized by then Secretary of Defense Les Aspin. The dinner was held at the Pentagon and included the top 15 or so major defense contractors. After the meal, the executives were shunted into a smaller private room with a slide projector. And the graph that was projected on the screen was not something they wanted to see. The chart showed how many companies in various categories of military equipment existed currently and how many companies the Defense Department was going to be able to afford to keep in business. This meeting became known as the Last Supper. And it was on that day that the military-industrial complex, at least as Eisenhower knew it, died. July 21st, 1993. Now, to Johnny Harris's credit, in his notes he mentioned the Last Supper, but he failed to mention the context. The context being that after the first Gulf War, we really gutted our military and our bases. Here's a clip from my Exposing the Military-Industrial Complex video to illustrate. We had nobody left to fight. America entered 1990 with 28 combat divisions spread across the active duty Army, National Guard, and reserves. By the year 2000, that number had shrunk to 10 active duty combat divisions, 8 National Guard combat divisions, and no reserve combat divisions. In 1990, the Air Force had 134 fighter squadrons. The reserves had 12, the National Guard had 45. Today, the Air Force has 48 fighter squadrons, the reserves operate 8, and the National Guard operates 25. In 1990, the U.S. Navy had 546 ships. Today, they have 239. And a lot of that is due to BRAC. The BRAC, or Base Realignment and Closure process, it was initiated to address the issue of excess military bases and facilities as the Cold War was kind of winding down. The goal of BRAC was to increase the efficiency of the military by closing unnecessary installations and realigning others to better support defense needs. So the lie here was one of omission. The Pentagon told defense companies to consolidate or die because military spending was going to shrink. And I'll get to the lie about military spending near the end of the video. The next lie is about stock prices. Here, Johnny Harris says,
some of the lawmakers who approve the Pentagon's budget own stocks in the defense contracting companies. Like, the lawmakers get richer if we spend more money on defense.
Some politicians might own defense company stocks, but it would be an incredibly bad investment to put all of your eggs in that basket. I actually took the top 5 defense company stocks and I ran them through portfoliovisualizer.com. If you took $10,000 in January of 2015 and invested $2,000 evenly in the top 5 defense stocks, you would have made about $30,000 over 10 years. But if you had invested in an index fund, you would have made $33,000. And if you had invested in tech like Meta, Amazon, Google, Apple, and Microsoft, you would have made $105,000. The truth is, defense stocks are not profitable. In fact, you could look at the annual reports. The top 5 defense stocks made a total of $13.2 billion in profit last year. That's less than the net profit of Procter & Gamble, which made $14.6 billion. That's the GDP of the Congo. See how that doesn't make any sense? A company that sells diapers. A company that sells diapers made more money than the top 5 defense companies combined. The fact is that the trope of defense companies being some sort of gravy train for Congress is a lie. And so is the lie about lobbying. Here Johnny Harris tries to tie defense companies into shady characters with suitcases full of money.
This is a list of how much money these defense contractors spend to influence our lawmakers into spending more money on the military so that these companies can make more money. You can see right here that Lockheed Martin is at the top of the list.
Johnny Harris makes the accusation that Lockheed Martin spent $2.7 million on lobbying. And that seems like a lot of money. But again, needs context. If you think defense is bad, don't look at the oil lobby. If you just look at Chevron Corp, they spent $6.5 million lobbying in 2024. Or look at Meta, the parent company of Facebook, that spent $18.8 million lobbying. If you're a congressman, there's 2 lobbyists in your office, one from Facebook with $18.8 million in a briefcase, and one from Lockheed Martin with $2.7 million in his briefcase. Who are you inviting into your office first? And Johnny Harris tries to square this with his idea that companies intentionally spread out manufacturing to make sure that they're in as many congressional districts as possible to spread around the money.
This map makes it easy to see how contractors intentionally allocate their operations all across the country, spanning dozens of states and political districts.
Maybe, but maybe that's just the nature of manufacturing today. I address this in my video exposing the military-industrial complex with the analogy of a pencil. People often criticize the F-35, saying it's made in 48 different states and 10 different countries, which makes it impossible to kill because no politician wants the jobs to leave their district. But what if that's just the nature of modern manufacturing? How many parts does a pencil have? Well, it has 5. The graphite is from Brazil, the wood is from Sweden, the paint is from Estonia, the rubber is from Malaysia, and the metal is from Mozambique. So let's take a look at just one part of the F-35, the tires. Dunlop makes the tires for the F-35 in Birmingham, England. Dunlop mainly gets its rubber from Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. The main manufacturing plant for the F-35 is in Fort Worth, Texas. Not a lot of rubber trees in Fort Worth, Texas. The next is the lie about the Pentagon's revolving door.
The revolving door is not a literal door, it's a metaphorical door between the Pentagon and the defense corporations, which allows top military leaders, like Jim Mattis, to serve in the military for decades, retire as a general, and then join the board of General Dynamics, a defense contractor, only to pass through the proverbial door to become the Secretary of Defense under Trump. After which, he passes through the door again to go back onto the board of General Dynamics, bringing with him all of his insider knowledge and government contacts and influence.
And again, this is a lie of context and omission. The revolving door needs some context. First off, you aren't going to find the kind of people who understand weapon systems graduating from Oberlin College. You're going to find them coming out of the military. Officers also have the kind of background checks and security clearances necessary to work at these companies. A top secret clearance costs about $5,500 to run, and it takes 6 to 18 months to get a clearance. So if you hire someone who doesn't have a clearance, you are putting them on the payroll where they can't work on anything that's classified for between 6 to 18 months. If you've ever tried to get a job at a defense contractor and you were rejected because you didn't have a security clearance, this is why. There aren't a lot of companies that are willing to carry a senior executive on payroll for 6 to 18 months doing uncleared work. So it makes sense to hire people who already have a clearance, like people coming out of the government or the military. Now, there are restrictions to this revolving door. For example, for 1 year, you may not accept compensation from a contractor to serve as an employee, officer, director, or consultant if, while working for the government, you had certain responsibilities or took certain actions relating to large procurement involving that contractor. So the revolving door isn't as freewheeling as you think. And finally, we have the lie about military spending. You know, this entire video kind of has this whole vibe, military spending bad because big number. And the U.S. does spend more money on the military than many other countries. Johnny Harris says that this is because...
So, one quick answer to this big question of why the United States spends so much more on its military is actually pretty simple. Because this is the cost of being the global hegemon, the one who gets to enforce the rules.
Now, you know, I wasn't sure what a hegemon was because it sounds like a Pokemon character. Hegemon, I choose you! But unfortunately, I majored in difficult subjects like computer science, engineering management, and cybersecurity. We didn't say a lot of words like hegemon. So I looked it up. And it turns out that hegemon means having dominant influence or authority over others. Okay, so what's the alternative? China? You know, China is trying to become this global hegemon with its Belt and Road Initiative. But a lot of third world countries that accepted loans from China are starting to realize that Belt and Road really means enslave and in debt. But saying military spending bad because of big number really isn't the best way to measure military spending.
Let me show you how much the United States spends on its military. Over here you've got Russia, China, India, and other big military powers. And yet, if you combine them all into one, the US still spends more.
A better way would be to look at military spending as a percentage of GDP, or gross domestic product. This is the monetary value of all goods and services produced by a country in a given time. In 1960, defense spending was about 9% of the US's GDP. During the height of the Vietnam War, it was 9.42%, and then it started falling. It went up a little under Reagan to 6.81%, but then it went down to 3.11% until 2001, and we all know what happened that year. At the height of the global war on terror, the U.S. defense spending as a percentage of GDP never went above 4.9%, which happened in 2010. And as of 2022, the U.S. defense spending is 3.45% of GDP, which we haven't seen since 2002. So, based on the most recent available data, defense spending as a percentage of GDP is actually lower than it has been in 20 years. So if you look at defense spending as a percentage of GDP through the International Institute for Strategic Studies, you get some interesting results. Yes, the United States does spend more money, but if you sort by percentage of gross domestic product, you get a much more interesting scenario. Ukraine has the highest spending per GDP. No surprise there, they're fighting for their lives. The US is actually ninth on the list to GDP percentage. And Poland, who is trying to create the largest military in Europe, technically spends more on its military percentage-wise than the US. So why did Johnny Harris lie or withhold information? Well, according to the Field Guide for Understanding Human Error by Sidney Decker, which is a book that engineers read, nobody comes into work wanting to do a bad job. No pilot says, boy, I hope I crash today. Or no detective says, man, I hope I arrest the wrong guy. No journalist comes into work wanting to get the story wrong. So I think we can rule out human error or bad research. I also think the choice of interviewing a climate change expert, a think tank policy wonk, and a peace activist didn't help. In the intelligence community, this is what we call a clue. So I think that the first possibility is that Johnny Harris came up with the conclusion, military spending bad because big number, and then just did research to support that conclusion. The second possibility comes from Johnny Harris's fame and popularity. The guy has 6 million followers on YouTube. He has a development cadence of about 1 video per week, and these videos have really high quality graphics. I mean, Johnny Harris either knows Adobe After Effects really well or he hired a lot of good people to do it. And if you look at his website, Johnny Harris is looking for researchers, writers, and animators, which leads me to believe he has a production staff. And his email is hidden behind corporate agents and handlers. So this scruffy independent journalist thing might be a shtick. It's certainly possible that Johnny Harris is so famous that he just goes into work and plays the scruffy independent journalist character. Maybe he just reads whatever people tell him to read and he concentrates on being a brand. So it is possible that he had no idea what he was reading wasn't true. He just was doing what he was told to do and collecting the paycheck, which at 6 million viewers is pretty substantial. And here's the third possibility, which is kind of a trap that famous people fall into. You know, a few months back, I made a video about lies told in this infographic about Project 2025. This infographic was spread by a Democratic operative and was seen millions of times. It was full of lies. And you know what a lot of people don't understand about the intelligence community is that we can't take political sides. And sometimes we tell you things you don't want to hear because you need to hear them in order to make certain kinds of decisions. And that's why when I fact-checked this Project 2025 infographic, I published the results with citations that it was only 17% true. And I did this knowing that some of my audience would get mad because they do not like President Trump or what he stands for, and they wanted to believe that the infographic was 100% true. I even created a $1,000 bounty for anyone who could find a single line in Project 2025 that said it would ban the teaching of slavery in schools. That bounty remains unclaimed. So what if Johnny Harris just came up with this video not because it was truthful, but because he knew it was what his audience wanted to hear? And that might be the big difference between Johnny Harris and Ryan Macbeth. Not just that he's a journalist and I'm an intel guy. I think the difference is that I don't think you're stupid. And I think you can handle uncomfortable truths. You know, I wrote the script for this video while I was traveling with Aeromed Lab, crisscrossing the country visiting interested investors because that giant fire hose of government money doesn't exist. And while I was at a hotel in Dallas, I saw a Starbucks with Kind bars. And I was going to buy one when I actually looked at the ingredients. And I stopped and I thought, this isn't healthy at all. I might as well have a Snickers. And that's kind of Johnny Harris in a nutshell, you know? He's kind of like a human Kind bar. On the outside, you look at it and you go, wow, this thing is good for me. And then you bite into it. And you realize there's nothing but junk inside. If you want to watch my video on exposing the military-industrial complex, that is below. Along with Johnny Harris's video, he deserves credit for the work that he did. Look, I don't have 6 million followers, so if you want to support my work, head on over to Substack, where for $5 a month, you can watch all of my videos ad-free. You can also head over to Bunker Branding, get one of my Intel Life t-shirts. I've also got a new one, Very NORAD Christmas, featuring an American F-22 and a Canadian CF-18 escorting Santa through his Christmas Eve ride. And thank you guys so much for watching.
Oh no! 'Tis the office Christmas party, and I have nothing to wear.
Hey kid, what's going on?
Think tank!
Office Christmas parties can be tough, but a Christmas sweater from Bunker Branding can make it better.
Awesome! A very NORAD Christmas!
Yeah, it's got an American F-22 and a Canadian CF-18 escorting Santa on his midnight ride. But there's even more from Bunker Branding.
Alcoholics moving cargo.
Intel Life, Aerosol, Live Laugh Launch for Destroyer, Trident, HIMARS, and Patriot. Think outside the bomb. Drone Suite Drone, Department of the Boat People, landmines, and even the tow missile. It would behoove you to grab one today.
Can Bunker Branding help me with my sexual harassment complaint from work?
We're a t-shirt company. Have you tried not being a jerk?
No.